Good morning. Today I want to talk about the downfall of France. I'll begin this discussion with two quotations or two quotes from Frantz Fanon. It is always important to listen to people who say things that sound very weird in your ears. It is not always good to listen only to people that say the things that you like to hear, because the people that tell you the things that you like to hear often do not really help you. All right? So the people that say things that sound very absurd in your ears are often the people that have things to say that would help you to address certain problems that you might be, minimizing, or problems whose effects might be obscure to you, but they say things that you don't see. So you should listen to those things and pay attention to people that have differing opinions to you. That is what is important in an intellectual debate. But we live in a world where everything has been so heavily politicized that if you tend to have an opinion that is different from others, you're often sidelined. So this system of empire has, engulfed so many aspects of life in the sense that if you say something that is not appreciated, something that is not in alignment um, with mainstream thinking, you're not welcome to dinner. In other words, you're excluded from the primary circles of social life. You're ostracized, so to speak. Frantz Fanon said about France, France finds itself an enemy of its conquest, incapable of, detaching itself from it, and incapable of defining new relationships. That's the first quote I want to mention this morning or in this day. The second one is that um, Africa is the only place where France maintains the illusion of being a superpower. Africa is the only place wherein France maintains the illusion of being a superpower. These are quotes from Frantz Fanon, was a visionary, a humanitarian visionary he was. But the vast ego of French politicians or the French political elites would not permit them to listen to the humble man that was called Frantz Fanon. He was out to help them. He was like a messiah in the French society, but they would call him a black man. He was a black man. That's what they would call him. See, he was biracial, but they would never listen to you. These are problems that are still ongoing, even today in our present day. No one wants to listen to you. You know, you would interact with people, even your coworkers. They'll have a problem somewhere in Africa, and you see they'll bring some European to analyze an African story, and they'll call the Europeans experts. You come from an African country, and they call a European, to talk about your country when you are around to tell the story, as you see from the African eyes. You see, they call themselves experts when they know nothing. You know, they don't understand the cosmic forces that govern the societies where these Africans come from. Now, Fanon was helping the French, you see, because they are stuck. France is stuck. This is a country which has enjoyed the blessing of so many great philosophers, the Montesquieu's, uh, Voltaire's, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, even Michel Foucault came later. You see, the many of the Jean-Paul Sartre. You see, these are people who really shouldered the vision of France as a great power in the past. But France is no longer a great power. It used to be. It had an empire, but the empire has disappeared. So France has fallen. It's just a question of time before. So France is officially relegated to the back burner. But you see, this has not gone unnoticed by some French politicians, you see, who have tried to warn the French. We have done so in our part because we are looking at the French, uh, the French policies toward African countries from the eyes of the African people, from the eyes of the oppressed. What they are looking at that relationship from the eyes of the oppressor, you see, the imperialistic oppressor. So we don't see it in the same way. So it's always important to look at things from two different angles. See, that's a dialectical relationship between these two things, the oppressor's vision and the vision of the oppressed. You see, but the ego doesn't not normally allow these things to be done in that way. And that is exactly what Frantz Fanon was trying to tell the French people, try to teach them, trying to instruct them to their new sensibilities, in dealing with situations that would come in the future. So they would actually try to avoid working in terms of contingency plans and work more in terms of proactive plans. You see, visionary plans, looking at things in the future and preparing in accordance with that vision. Jacques Chirac himself had warned the French, you see, telling them that, or reminding the French people that a great portion of the wealth that the French people enjoy, you see, originates from the exploitation of African people. And he told them that it would be wise. In his words, he said that the French have to have the good faith. He insisted on the expression good faith, those two words, the good faith and not the generosity to give back to the African people what they have taken, what the French have taken from the African people. These are the admonitions of Jacques Chirac. You see, Jacques Chirac said these things, but as usual, the ego doesn't let people to understand this because the French have been so into this exploitation, this oppression thing, that it has become it has become normalized in their judgment. That was an error. That was a moral solecism. You see, a moral fault that had become normalized in the minds of the French people, from the children to the adults. Everybody thought that it was, you see, a given that they would just go to Africa, take whatever they want from African countries. If there was a president that was opposing them, they would find a way to eliminate that president. And they have killed so many African presidents that way. You see? So France is surviving at the expense of African people. Mhm. That's it. It's nothing new. They knew it. Some of them knew it, but they just did not know how to get away from that. You see? Now, Marine Le Pen, when this French Algerian boy, Nahel Mezouk, was murdered by the police, you see, in the aftermath of that, you had all these riots and all that. And in the French parliament, Marine Le Pen questioned the French Prime Minister Elisabeth Borne. She was asking, Qu'avez-vous fait de la France? Qu'avez-vous fait de la France? Which means, what have you done to France? So she was questioning that. Let's see what is going on. Let's see what is going on in France. And it's untenable. You see, it's untenable. France was going down the drain. And they were all witnesses to that to that tragedy. It's ineluctable. That is France's ineluctable fate. When you depend on illusion, when you depend on conspiracy, when you depend on a policy of conspiratorial integration, you're bound to witness a brutish decline. As I've written, the great power that depends on a policy of conspiratorial integration to ensure its survival in this world of heightened connectedness is bound to witness a brutish decline in this world of materialistic perversity and self-interested dead weight. The reason is because the people that feel victimized, that feel humiliated by experiential victimization will revolt in a measure to redress the balance. These people will create they will create a community. You see, they'll create a community That victimization would generate a kind of community which will provide a sense of fraternity, which is going to prevent or preclude fraternal rivalry between the people that are inside this community. This is exactly what you find in countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Guinea, and many other African countries which are not fighting an open war against the French in Africa right now. But this is a simmering. There is a simmering tension in these countries. It's a boiling anger against the French, not necessarily the French people. You see, the French political elite, the guardian elites. You see, of Europe. You see, the French basically is trying to rationalize the African humiliation in alignment with their callousness. You see, and that is what France Afrique is all about, which is the first thing I want to discuss. The first aspect that could be used to explain the fall of the fall of France. I don't want to call it the French or the fall of the French African Empire, the fall of the French colonial empire. Number one is France Afrique. What is this thing called France Afrique? It has been characterized in very different ways. They've used so many different adjectives to define it or to characterize it. They've called it opaque, they've called it strange, weird, callous, you see, inhumane, horrible, whatever you have. I have called it obscure, you know. So France Afrique is a term that defines or that signifies the French imperialistic oppression and domination of its of its African colonies. You see, because there's no former, they're still there oppressing the African people. You see, politically and economically, they're oppressing African countries. So there's nothing like former French colonies, you know. So it is a kind of policy which is, you know, very prominent in the real jungle of obscurity. You know, this is something that has been going on since the 60s. People have been contesting this domination and oppression by France, and many people who have contested these policies have been murdered, brutally murdered. You know, France continues to do that, and as Frantz Fanon aptly noted, you see, France finds itself an enemy of its conquest. So you see, these colonies in Africa were seen as conquest, you know, conquered territories, you know, plantations, chattels, if you may, with the exception of Algeria, where relations of identity were affirmed. But even in Algeria, where Fanon finally ended up working against France, he was French, but he ended up working against France because he could not take it anymore. He tried to advise the French about this, about the ramifications of this policy of unequal socialization that is imposed through, you know, militarized bureaucracy, you know, which impose bureaucratic impassivity on the people, on the victims of this oppression. So there's time for everything. So the people got fed up of it. They cannot take it anymore. You see, when people continue to clamor for a change, and all you do is to tell them to sit quiet and to accept their fate. You see, to accept the fact that they are trapped or they are confined in a state of disorientation. At some point, you see, it's going to explode when people cannot take it anymore. So that's it. So France Afrique is the main cause of this problem, but it's not the precipitating cause. It is something that has always been there, something that has always been contested, even by the French. You see, writers like Francois Xavier Vechaff, they've always talked about this in their books. He wrote a book about France Afrique, and he mentioned these things, and they're trying to advise the French political elite to revise the policies towards African states. You know, but the French political elites have never done so, from the days of Francois Mitterrand to Jacques Chirac himself, who came out after he had left power. He's trying to advise the French because the realization dawned on him that if nothing is done, France was going to collapse, which is what is happening now, as we all can obviously see, And then you had Nicolas Sarkozy, Francois Hollande, and this current president, Emmanuel Macron. You see, so France Africa is the first one. People cannot take it anymore. So the great power that depends on a policy of conspiratorial integration to ensure its survival in this world of heightened connectedness is bound to witness a brutish decline. That is what the French are witnessing. It's almost unbelievable to them. It's almost unreal to them. But it is what is happening. You see, it's almost like it's not happening, but it is happening. France is being bundled out of Africa. I remember the French writer, what's her name? One African, Cameroonian and French, you see, Calix Bayala, she said that it would take just one afternoon for the Africans to chase France away from Africa. And she questioned, why are we not doing it? Why are Africans not doing it? But there's time for everything. Sometimes you need the factors to be just right. Circumstances have to be right, and things will happen. So that was with France Afrique. That was the first aspect, which is the overarching aspect. But as I've said, it's not the precipitating aspect, which I'll get to in a while. So the second aspect that I would like to discuss this morning is this whole notion of postmodern valuations, the imposition through bureaucratic militarism or militaristic bureaucracy of these postmodern values on African people. That is what the French are doing. What are these postmodern values? You see, all this homosexuality, transsexuality, all those things that you're trying to impose, on the African people. Those are the things that you're imposing on African people, even though you've been in Africa for 139 years. Since the Berlin Conference, you have been dealing with Africans for all this time. So the French knows Africa like no other European does. Because the British have left, the Portuguese have left, the Spaniards have left, but France is still very active. Okay, I will not say that the British have left. They're still there in some capacity, but not like the French, who are still openly controlling the politics and the economies of these African countries. 14 of them are being dominated and oppressed by France, even in this day and age. So that's the second aspect. The imposition of postmodern values on African people. These values are anathema to the African people. They don't live by these standards. Africans are inherently polygamous people. That is the nature of African societies. When the Africans are no longer polygamous, they have become altered. That is it. So polygamy is inherently cosmic in the African society. That is something that is inherent to the structure of African societies. That's how they lived. You cannot come and tell these people, look, polygamy is you're condemning polygamy, and you're telling them that it's okay for Africans to be homosexual. No, the societies do not accept that. It's nothing that the presidents can do about this. It is the society itself. You see, the society itself is very hostile to this practice. You dig? African societies are very hostile to these practices because they consider them demonic. And not demonic in the sense of, not necessarily in the biblical sense, in the sense of culture. You see, in a very customary sense. It's a horrible crime. This is not to say that you don't have people there who do those things, who are involved in those types of practices, but in the ancient African societies, if you were involved in those kind of deviant practices, you got ostracized from the communities. That's exactly how it was. So what you're doing in Europe, or what you think is applicable, or what is normal in Europe, and it's questionable. Because if these practices were normal, even in Europe, you will not be having all these parades. Because the fact that you're having parades bespeaks the fact that you are trying to mainstream it. You're trying to make it normal in the eyes of people. Because something that is normal, you don't force people to see that it's normal. You see, something that is acceptable by people is not something that you force it on people. You see, it's about institutionalism. When you study institutionalism, you see that we say that institutions are effective. You see, when you don't force people to accept them. This is because when institutions are effective, people do not think about the consequences if they don't respect those institutions. But they tend to think that their conduct have to be in conformity with the requirements of those institutions. You understand? So those are the things. So you don't force something that is normal, you see, to people. So the African societies are very hostile to these practices just because of these things. They are not built that way. People don't like it. People like to live their lives, the father, the mother, the children. That's how it works. The father goes to the to the bush to hunt. The mother goes to the farm to get some food, and they all sit together and eat as a family, as a political unit. Now you're trying to introduce something which the Africans find very aberrant, if not immoral. That is one other aspect that is an irritant to the African people. You see, you're trying to antagonize Africans with these practices which are very aberrant to them. You see, they don't understand. The Africans don't understand why you're trying to introduce this type of things, even though you've been interacting with them for all these years. You should be the one to tell the other Europeans that, look, let's leave these people alone. That's how they are. But you are there threatening these Africans with sanctions if they don't accept this. You find French diplomatic missions going to countries and trying to lecture Africans on morality, you see, on how good it is for them to accept these practices in their societies, which is not normal for those people. The African people don't accept that. You see, that's the second aspect that I want to discuss about the imposition of postmodern values, sleeping with, men sleeping with men, women sleeping with women, raping dogs. The Europeans sleep with dogs, not sleeping with dogs like you sleep with a dog. They have having some type of sexual relationship with dogs, with animals. Some time ago, I think it was on the Swedish radio. I was following some story, and they were saying that the number of pets that have been sexually abused by their owners have increased in the country. That was so many years ago. Hmm? The number of pets that have been sexually abused by their owners. And then they continue saying that. And there was an expert there, explaining that it is okay, it is legal to have sex with animals, but it's not legal to rape animals. Look at that. How do you rape an animal? How do you rape? How do you have sex with a dog? Does the dog consent to that? So you see, those are the kind of things that Africans don't want to deal with. They have all the problems: poverty, destitution, water scarcity, power outage, you see, health problems, malaria. Those are the things the Africans struggle with every day. You know, they don't want to have anything to do with, sex change, you see, or these trans things. They don't want to deal with that. That is not their, it's not, it's not their culture. It's not that, it's nothing to do with their societies. You know, Africans have pets. They have dogs and all that. So you have to listen to what the Africans are telling you. You don't look at Africa from your eyes, from your understanding of the world, because there are no universal set of norms that unite the world in an equitable manner. You dig? That's a normative argument I'm trying to share now with you. There are no universal set of norms that unite the world in an equitable manner. Even what you call human rights. What is human rights? What you call human rights in Europe might not be the same as what these Africans or the Asians term human rights. You see, you are preaching human rights in Europe, and at the same time, you're oppressing and dominating Africa. So what is that human rights you're talking about? You see, you're preaching human rights. At the same time, you're condemning people to death in the US. At the same time, you're promoting racial discrimination in Europe. What is that human rights? Is the human rights only limited to sexual, or what we call sexual deviance as the African see it? Hmm? What is that human rights? So you see, it's that kind those types of arguments. You see, in the academia, a wide range of opinions is allowed, but you see, it's even in the academia, it's becoming increasingly problematic because there you cannot just say whatever you want. If you say that, oh, you want to question that sense of morality, you see, you want to question that why are you imposing this on the African people? You could get yourself into trouble. But you should be able to discuss these things at least in a very academic environment where different opinions are supposed to be allowed. So the forcing of this postmodern values to the African societies is what many Africans don't find very appealing. They don't like it. They rather have you leave them alone to deal with their many problems that they have in their countries. So that's one aspect. So we'll move on to the next aspect, which is a very critical one. A very critical one, which I'll call the precipitating cause of the French demise. You see, great power meddling. Great power meddling. Again, I have to remind you, I have to refresh your memory about Fanon's quote. You see, that France finds itself an enemy of its conquest. Yes, that's what he has said. A very important quote for the French to take heed of. You see, but this quote I want to tell you, Africa is the only place wherein France maintains the illusion of being a superpower. Africa is the only place wherein France maintains the illusion of being a superpower. This is the third point I want to make now. You see? So without Africa, what would France be? So if we take Africa away, then France will not be considered a superpower. And this is exactly what Fanon was saying. France has not been able, you see, to detach itself from its colonies, which were chattels, plantations of France. France has not been able to detach itself from it, and France has not been able to define new relations. But then the political elites of France went ahead and started antagonizing Russia. They got involved, they got themselves involved in this great power war, in this great power tension between the US and Russia. They had no place in that conflict. You see, I remember during the Iraqi invasion when Colin Powell was doing a speech act at the UN, telling lies on the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, making the case for the Americans to go and invade Iraq. You see, Dominique de Villepin, you see, a French politician, he objected to that, and France did not take part in the American invasion of Iraq. You see, why did France not have the same courage to stay away from that? If France did not get involved in this, if they had stayed neutral, perhaps they would have a good chance to work their problems out with the African countries, which is always there. You see, but the arrogance of France has always pushed them into problems. Sarkozy went to Senegal and said some very stupid things there, that the Africans have not entered into history. We have not entered enough into history. That's what Sarkozy went and said in Senegal, in Dakar, in 2007. And then Emmanuel Macron went to Burkina Faso. I think that was in 2016. He went to the university campus there, and he was telling some students that the president at the time was Roch Marc Christian Kabore. All these Africans with all these funny European names. Roch Marc Christian Kabore. And he was in front of the president. You see, he's trying to diminish the president in front of the young university students. I just said to them, he was telling the student, Emmanuel Macron was telling the students that, oh, if you have electricity problems in this country, the person you have to ask is not me, it is your president. You should talk to your president. You see, he's trying to diminish this president. Well, he was right. But those are not the kind of things Africans like to hear. Even the students that were in that hall, you see, they were laughing and laughing, and the Kabore was angry. He got offended at some point and left the hall. Even some students probably did not like it. See, because no African like to see his father getting humiliated by some strange man that looks so different from them. You see, the French have been African long enough to understand these things, but it is this arrogance of the French, this boastfulness of the French, you see, that is pushing them more and more into destruction. You see, self-induced destruction. That is what is happening to the French people, or at least the French elites, political elites. They had no business. They had no business in Russia. Nicolas Sarkozy was involved in the destruction of Libya. You see, he was actually promoting this war against the Libyans, and Libya got totally destroyed. You know, and the Africans are facing they're facing the effects of that destruction of Libya. You see, the proliferation of small arms across the Sahel region and across the whole of Africa. The guns everywhere, the murders, rebellions, and killings everywhere. Africans killing each other. You see, the terrorism is spreading like wildfire in Africa because of that. The destruction of Libya. Libya, that used to be a very vibrant country that welcomed so many Africans south of the Sahara. Now, Libya has become a shadow of its old self, a country that is unable to find its soul. Libya is a country with a broken soul, thanks to the French politics, or the French political elites, if you may. Now, in 2011, I'm speaking of the precipitating cause of the French downfall. Now, in 2011, France signed a deal with the Russians, you see, to manufacture two battleships, you see, two assault ships that would carry helicopters and soldiers and tanks and, military vehicles. You see, 700 personnel or 700 soldiers could board those ships. They call them the Mistral ships, which the French have considered to be an engineering marvel. See, the French naval industry considers them as such. So it's a big thing for the French. It's the ships that they carry assault helicopters, you see, and tanks and fighting vehicles and soldiers. So it's quite big, and it is high tech. And there's a hospital there, a big hospital. See, complete hospital inside the ship. It's an engineering marvel for the French naval industry. So the Russians were fascinated with this idea, and they wanted two of the ships. So they ordered two of the ships, I think during the time of Francois Hollande, if I'm not mistaken. So they came to a deal. I think it was 1.2 billion euros. It's about 1.2 billion dollars. They sat down and decided that the French were going to deliver the ships by 2015. Between the deal was signed between Russia and France. So you see, then the war in Ukraine broke out. Russia invaded Crimea, and Russia supported the Eastern Ukrainians who are Russian speakers. So the Americans decided to sanction the Russians, and the French then got there. They decided with the U.S. to punish the Russians for that. So you see the argument that we always have between realism and liberal institutionalism. You see, we're saying that states that are involved in business do not go to war. But you see, the Russians have been dealing with they had this big business deal with the French, but that did not preclude the French from actually siding with the U.S. You see, to confront Russia. for the invasion of Crimea and supporting of the rebels in eastern Ukraine. You see, so but you have to question what really pushed the French into all these things. What pushed them there? The French had so much to lose. They had so much to lose. These animals, they have so much to lose. I'm sorry about that. You see, it's just a way of saying it. They had so much to lose. How did they not understand that this thing would bring their downfall? It's pretty sad. It's pretty sad. Because it's painful to see that this is the country of all these great philosophers, these great thinkers. They could not think about something so simple like that. And then the war has been raging on ever since. So at some point, they signed this deal to stop the conflict, you know, the Minsk agreement between the French, the Russians, and the Germans. France and Germany were supposed to be guarantors of that treaty in Ukraine. Ukraine was involved, Russia was involved, France and Germany were involved. But France and Germany were the guarantors. But then we started hearing them later. Francois Hollande. You see, Francois Hollande, he was very much involved in all of this. And there's another name that they don't talk about it anymore because these people come and do their destruction, these opportunists, and then they just disappear from the scene. Jean-Yves Le Drian. These are the people. If the French have to put anybody on trial, Jean-Yves Le Drian, Francois Hollande, those two people, they've been very much involved. They're putting all the blame. They're putting all the blame on this young president, Emmanuel Macron. Macron is very, very inexperienced. You see, Macron is the scapegoat. You see, he's the scapegoat because he's trying to deal with something that he cannot deal with. These things have happened. Sarkozy started it. Francois Hollande made it worse. And Emmanuel Macron is there to shoulder the burden of all these people. But when these things were happening, remember what I said. Jacques Chirac was warning them, but they don't listen. The garden elites never listen to the voice of the wailing victims in the jungle. They never listen to that because of the ego, the vastly inflated egos of this garden elites. That's it. Francois Hollande, he was involved in all of this stuff. You see, he came out and said it that France and Germany never wanted Ukraine to respect the Minsk agreement. That they wanted to buy time so that Ukraine can actually build this army to fight against Russia. And these statements were supported by Angela Merkel. I think it was Angela Merkel that said it first, and then Francois Hollande actually confirmed it. So that was the case. So those were the problems. Now the situation has spiraled out of control. Hmm? Now, if I get back to that Mistral agreement, so when this war broke out, Russia had to be sanctioned. You see, and it was a disaster. So you see the number. No other country in the world has been sanctioned as much as Russia has been sanctioned. But you see, the Russians are still there, standing on their feet. So the French unilaterally canceled that deal, the Mistral deal. That is, those two battleships they were supposed to construct and then sell to the Russians for $1.3 billion or 1.2 billion euros. France canceled the deal. And then France had to reimburse the Russians. I think they started first by giving the Russians 785 million euros, something like that. You see, they started by giving Russians that, and then the Russians wanted more compensation because they had trained a crew to take care of the ships, and they had built new ports where the ship were going to be kept in Vladivostok in Russia. You know, so the Russians wanted more money, but eventually the French came out with a statement that the Russians have finally accepted the reimbursement, that the deal was closed, and the Russian authorities confirmed that the deal was closed. And those two ships were finally sold to Egypt. They were sold to Egypt at the cost of about, I think, 950 and 960 million euros after the Russian equipment. You see, because the Russians had installed their equipment in those ships, they customized the ship. So the Russians had to remove their equipment from the ship before the ship was sold to the Egyptians. You can imagine that humiliation. So ever since then, I knew that the Russians will never forgive the French for that betrayal. The Russians said it, that, oh, all the deal is closed. But you see, these are things you say, but the things you carry in your heart within you. In Africa, we say, you don't carry man for heart. You don't carry man for heart. It means that there is simmering anger in you. You're waiting for the right moment to express that anger. You see, the deal was closed. It's not like the Russians cannot build that kind of ship, but it's like the Russians wanted to construct or to build some kind of good ties with the French, to cement those ties, business ties with the French. You see, because the Russians are trying to reassert their power. You see, they're projecting their power because after the fall of the Soviet Union, Russia was a crumbling nation. They were struggling to survive. Gorbachev went to the US in 1997 and told them that you cannot continue to humiliate the people or continue to humiliate the nation and think that the people will not have consequences or the people will not retaliate. So those are the things. So the meddling of France in this problem in Ukraine was the precipitating cause of the downfall of France. Yeah, the Russians have been looking for ways to get back at France, to punish the French for that betrayal. It's not so much about canceling the deal, but you see, canceling the deal on behalf of the US or at the behest of the US, canceling the Mistral deal at the behest of the US. That is what really angered the Russians, in my opinion. You see? That was the third part, the third aspect that I wanted to discuss about, which is the precipitating cause. You have the overarching cause, which is France-Afrique, that anger that has boiled or that keeps on boiling in the hearts of African people. You see, that anger that is pushing Africans on the verge of explosion. They want to act against this. You see, they want to actually push the French away from Africa. You see, France-Afrique. Then you have these postmodern values, the imposition of postmodern values on African people with the help of militarized bureaucracy. You're threatening people with sanctions if they don't respect or accept what you're telling them to do. Or these people are telling you, we are not your children, we are not your colonies, even though they are still colonies. And then this aspect of the French meddling in Ukraine, they didn't have to do it. They could have stayed on the side and just be observers, irrespective of what the Americans think. Now, the final aspect I want to mention now is the U.S. influence. You see, the U.S. relations. You see, which is connected to the third aspect, the precipitating cause. America is a friend to no one. It's a friend to no one. And Henry Kissinger himself has said it. To be a friend with the US is what? Is deadly. To be an enemy to the US is deadly. To be a friend to the US is fatal. I think these are the words of Henry Kissinger. This is something that is popularly, commented by so many people. This is one of the reasons why de Gaulle never wanted to be a vassal of France, because many of these European countries now are vassals. They're even worse than vassals. They're chattels of the US. The Germans, for instance, are an American chattel, and they're very happy about this. France is another chattel, because if America is not somewhere, the French cannot go there. Look at what happened in Afghanistan. When the Americans were withdrawing their troops from Afghanistan, Jean-Yves Le Drian was actually begging the Americans to stay behind because France could not stay in Afghanistan alone. You know, now we have the situation in Africa. I'll summarize here. We have all these countries, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and even Guinea. They're progressively pushing the French away from Africa, and it's going to continue until France is going to leave Africa. France is going to be humiliated in Africa. No amount of soldiers. You can bring all the soldiers of the American army. You can bring all the soldiers of the French army. They will not be able to defeat the Africans because this is not. It's not just a war. You talk about the Third World War. Yeah, it is a Third World War, but for the Africans, this is about spiritual rehabilitation. It's about structuralism. If you study structuralism, you see that societies disappear sometimes for hundreds of years, only to reemerge in new societies that may not even look like what happened in the past. So this is what is happening there. You see? So it would be important for the French to look into this problem. What have we done wrong? Like Marine Le Pen was questioning Elizabeth Bourne. Qu'avez-vous fait de la France? What have you done to France? What have you done to France? You are people who have lived in Africa. You've been with the Africans for 139 staggering years. You ought to know what the Africans stood for. You ought to understand the Africans. And you see, at some point, you make certain adjustments in your relations because you see, the world is becoming increasingly interconnected to the point that you will not be allowed to do this anymore. The world is becoming more and more diversified. They call it a multipolar world. You see, Turkey is in Africa. Yeah, the South Koreans are now in Africa. Hmm? The Americans are in Africa. Have all these military bases in Africa. You see, so many countries are vying. This is just to tell you, to remind you, the African people, to be comforted that Africa is the mother of humanity. They would call Africa shithole countries according to the words of Donald Trump. But in effect, or in essence, Africa is the mother of humanity. These Africans or these countries in Africa have been, you know, robbed for centuries upon centuries, but the minerals are seeming not to ever end. They've taken and taken from Africa, but Africa is still there. Africans have to understand what they have. What they have. You see, Africans have to know their value in this world. You know, Donald Trump spoke of African countries, he called them shithole countries, including Haiti. And then Africans got angry, they got offended. You see, you don't have to be offended. You see, if somebody call you an animal, if you know that you're not an animal, why would you be offended by that? Hmm? You don't have to be offended by that. You see, just to look within you and ask yourself the question, why did this person call me an animal? Why did this person call you a monkey? You know you're not a monkey. If they call you a monkey living in a shithole country, okay, you go look at the monkeys. Then you will find that there are monkeys that look like white people. And then you tell the white person, okay, you say that I'm a monkey, but this monkey looks like you. What have you got to say about this monkey that looks like your brother? You see? So that's the thing. Don't be angry when these white folk, because they've always been devalorizing African people. That's what they do. They diminish you. They diminish you, diminish whatever you have, just to make you to move your interest away from what you have. Because what you have is what they want. They want to exploit what you have to the fullest. They tell you that what you have is having no value. You see? But what you have is what they want. They want to pay almost nothing. If possible, they want to get what you have free of charge. That is what they do to you. Now we are getting feedback that the French are being betrayed by the Americans in Niger, because the French are being pushed out of Africa, and the Americans they see themselves, they see how this tension is growing. You see, they see that they will not be able to contain the African people. It's over 1.5 billion people. What is America going to do to African countries? You see, America cannot fight in Africa. They cannot fight. Because if there is a close-knit fraternity, as I've said before, when there is a community, which is what Africans are tending to build now by themselves. You see, they're building communities of humiliation. You see, shared victimization in African countries is creating a sense of community across the transboundary communities of victimized people. Keep in mind, these so-called countries in Africa were not countries. You see, these are European constructions. You see, so these communities that they're building in Africa out of shared victimization is tending to forge an airtight bond of victimhood across transboundary communities of victimized peoples, of victimized African peoples. You see, this brings forth a sense of fraternity which is going to preclude fraternal rivalry amongst African peoples. The Americans have seen this firsthand. They've seen it. No amount of weaponry can stop this resolve of the African people. How many Africans are you going to kill? If you start to fight a war in Niger, in Cameroon, people start to fight against the Americans. In Zimbabwe, people start to fight against the Americans. In Kenya, people start to fight. You're going to beg them to stop. That is it. That is the issue. The Americans are not stupid. They know what is going on. The problem is the French. The French got blinded. They got blinded by their ego. They got blinded by distraction. Because when you have so much, the tendency is that you get blinded. You see, abundance makes you susceptible. Abundance makes you susceptible, you see, to distraction. When there's so much around you, the French will they become so used to this. They're going to take from this country, take from that country, take from this country. And when you want to object, they quieten you. You see, they chastise you, they chasten you. Now this abundance of resources that they've been taking from African countries have blinded them with a heightened sense of opportunism. You see, they got blinded by distraction. So they are taking and taking, and they could not detach themselves from this. They could not detach themselves from this distraction, and so they could not define new relations. While others were struggling, every other country was studying what the French were doing as regards their African colonies. And they came and they started to propose something new. They're trying to propose relations that would, highlight the dignity of the African people. Africans love that. They love to trade. They love to trade with people that treat them nicely. They love to trade with people that respect them. Who doesn't like that? Who wants to talk to someone that's hostile to you? Someone who's arrogant to you? Who likes to deal with that? You see, you come to the house and you have a woman in the house that's always harassing you. Where are you from? Where did you go to? Come here. Who likes to be with that kind of woman? When you go out, you see a woman telling you, hello, baby, come on over here. Let me give you a nice kiss. We don't like to hear that. That is it. The French have been victimized by their own ego, their own short-sightedness, their own greed, which I call militant avarice. That is the precipitating cause of their problems. You see, they go into Ukraine out of greed. You see, out of egocentric greed, egocentric avarice, militant avarice, thinking that they're going to, like the American mantra was saying, we're going to fight, we're going to supply Ukraine or support Ukraine till the last Ukrainian. Well, what they're saying is that they were going to destroy Ukraine at the expense of Russia. They were not going to defeat Russia because that's totally impossible. They cannot surround Russia. They were just going to try to entrap Russia, which you cannot do because Russia is a formidable great power, an impenetrable fortress. That's what they've seen. You can throw bombs here and there, but you cannot defeat Russia. It's not the first time. Napoleon, the French leader, the French emperor, had tried to invade Russia. He failed. Hitler, with his formidable military, the Blitzkrieg, he tried to invade Russia. He failed. America cannot. Nobody can defeat Russia. That's clear. Everyone knows it. So they know that they cannot defeat Russia. Instead of siding with Russia to fight against what they perceive as their main enemy, which they've designated as China, they want to go and weaken Russia. They say that they don't want Lloyd Austin, the American Secretary of Defense, is saying that we're openly saying these things. They want to weaken Russia. But Russia is only getting stronger. Russia is controlling the whole of Africa, not by their, not because they want it, because the Africans are inviting them to do that. So the Russians are coming to Africa by invitation. Think about this. If the Russians had had this deal, Mistral, if the Russians had really built, that really nurtured this relation, or if France had done that with the Russians, do you think that the Russians would have, they'll be in, they'll be in deep trouble now. They will not know what to do with France, but they've made it very easy for the Russians, you see, to fight against them in Africa, because the Russians perceive the French as a staunch enemy, a traitor, never to be trusted. You could even see what when I think it was Emmanuel Macron, when he went to the Kremlin on a state visit to visit President you know Vladimir Putin. You know, there was this famous table. Putin was sitting like how many, like 20 meters or 10 or 15 meters away from him. And then when the Africans come to Russia to visit Putin, he's embracing them, greeting them like Africans greet themselves. That is what Africans want. Times have changed. France has fallen. The Africans are rising. It will take some time. See, it will take some time, but the demise of France will be even quicker than the French themselves anticipated. It will not take long before the French are chased out of Chad and Cote d'Ivoire. It will not take long for this to happen. The demise of France was expected, and it is ineluctable. It is a demise that is born out of ego, of the vastly inflated ego of the French garden elites. It is a demise that is based on this, distraction. You see, it's a demise that is based on militant avarice, egocentric avarice of the French. You should have listened to Frantz Fanon. Listen to the people that have a differing opinion to you, because those are the people that have something to tell you that will help you. Don't listen to the people that play lip service to you. Don't listen to the people that sing praises to you. Don't listen to the people that sing panegyrics to you. Listen to the people that contest your views. Listen to the people that give you an alternative viewpoint. Those are the people that will contribute to your survival in this world. Not people that tell you things that are going to keep you in the state in which you are, because they're telling you what you like to hear and not telling you what you ought to know to survive in this world. France has to leave Africa. It's long overdue. Africa is nobody's backyard. As the Cameroonian president, Mr. Paul Biya, keeps saying, Cameroon is nobody's backyard. Every African leader has to take this mantra. Africa is nobody's backyard. Not the Americans, not the Russian, not the Chinese, not the Korean, not the Turks. Nobody's backyard. Africa is resting on the shoulders of the African children. That is how it's supposed to be. No country is going to come and dominate Africa as it's been. See, Africans are sick and tired of Western oppression and domination. We're heading into a world of deliberative interdependence, which will help us deal with the problem of conspiratorial integration, which only generates immoral dependencies. Immoral dependencies are to be fought and destroyed. There's no need for people to depend on things that only oppress them. You don't call people shithole, you don't call people animals, and at the same time, you're out to come and exploit these people, to come and exploit their countries and take from these countries without giving anything back to these people. Cannot deal with this situation anymore. It's untenable. I'll leave it at that. Share with your friends, share with your family, share with everyone this beautiful message of redemption, this beautiful message of comprehensive remediation, not only of the Africans, but of the French, because the French have to be humbled. We've told the French to go away from confrontational ways of doing things and to become more conciliatory, to take conciliation and humility as a way of socializing with people. Bellicosity, belligerence, confrontation do not actually help. They can only help for as long as it takes. All right, I'll leave it at that.